Hey everyone. So, there are so many different ways that I could start this video off, but for anyone that came here just to hear me talk about AI, you can go ahead and skip to the timestamp on screen. I actually have a lot of different topics that I want to discuss, but this is a video that I have been wanting to make for a long time now. I think I've already made my stance clear in the past regarding artists and writers and other creators that have resorted to using AI. But before getting into all of that, what I would first like to discuss are some of the other, more ethical techniques that a lot of artists use to create their work at a faster rate. Some people might consider these techniques to be life hacks or shortcuts or whatever. Now, as you can see, for this video, I chose to draw the character Pete from the 1981 movie American Pop, directed by Ralph Bakshi. And this drawing is actually sort of fitting for the subject of this video. I've talked about Bakshi before in some of my previous videos, like he directed Fire and Ice, he worked on the 60s Spider-Man cartoon, he directed the original animated Lord of the Rings movie, but something that Bakshi did in a lot of his films like American Pop and Lord of the Rings is he used rotoscoping, which I briefly mentioned in my stylized cinema video, though I didn't really explain what exactly that is. Rotoscope is a technique where basically you film something in live action and then you trace over it frame by frame. The same technique has been used in a lot of classic Disney films like the original Peter Pan and Snow White. A lot of the human characters were traced in those movies. Or how about that one film, Scanner Darkly, with Keanu Reeves, Robert Downey Jr.? That's not a video filter, the filmmakers actually painted over every frame of that movie. So rotoscoping is basically the 2D equivalent of motion capture, like with movies like James Cameron's Avatar, or Alita is another example. There is also a lot of anime nowadays that use rotoscoping to some extent, but instead of tracing live action, what they'll do is create CGI models of each of the characters and just sorta trace over them. So anyway, even though this drawing is not really traced, I did use a reference of one of the most famous screenshots from the movie, where Pete pulls down his sunglasses with the middle finger. And even programs like Clip Studio Paint have features where you can use stock 3D assets for either referencing or tracing or whatever you need them for. Now, when it comes to the controversy of tracing and referencing, my opinions are not so black and white. I do believe that just as long as you are not stealing someone else's art, then it's not so much as a problem. There still are some underlying issues which I'll mention in just a minute, but I think tracing and referencing is a lot more ethical than using generative AI. Because something that I've discovered is that you can learn a lot about shapes and anatomy by practicing with tracing. For example, between 2015 to 2019, a lot of those old drawings that I did back then, I used 3D models that I traced from.
Oh, I'm secure with what I do.
Then just say it. You're a tracer.
But now that I've learned so much about anatomy and muscles, I mostly just use the 3D stuff as a side-by-side reference while I'm drawing, sort of like with this video you're watching now. So like I said, it only really becomes a major issue if you are literally stealing and tracing other people's art, and unfortunately there are a lot of famous artists that have resorted to art theft, especially with comic book artists. For example, artists such as Francesco Mattina, Joelle Jones, and Adam Hughes have all been caught tracing and stealing other people's artwork, and that is completely wrong, and I personally believe that they should all be fired for that. The same also goes for Greg Land, who has literally made a name for himself stealing and tracing other people's work. And sadly, even Bob Kane, the so-called creator of Batman, was himself a thief. He would take artwork that other people made and just trace over it. Even some of the first drawings of Batman were stolen. I do know a lot of people that try to downplay how much of a thief Bob Kane was, primarily out of nostalgia, but the sad truth is that Bob Kane was the biggest hack in the comic book industry. The man literally went out of his way to make sure that Batman's true creator Bill Finger got nothing, not even credit for his creation. So unfortunately, there's a lot of theft when it comes to comics, especially with tracers. Now, perhaps there is a bit of a gray area when it comes to artists like Roy Lichtenstein and Shepard Fairey. However, if you're not stealing anyone's work and you're just tracing a stock 3D model of something or like a photo that you took yourself, then it's not really a problem. Like, I will admit, I do struggle with drawing things like cars or wagons or like dynamic fight scenes, so I will often resort to using 3D models to trace from.
You fucking tracer! Your mother's a tracer!
Though I will like to echo what Bakshi often said of his movies, which is why I chose to draw fan art of one of his movies for this video. And what he believed is that as long as you are not stealing, and as long as you are able to make it yourself and get your point across, that is all that matters. That is self-expression. Though I do not recommend relying on tracing all the time because it can actually stunt creativity. You should still be able to create stuff from scratch without just copying something else. Even if you're just tracing from a stick figure, you should be able to draw your own details like faces, hair, and clothing instead of just tracing everything, because then there becomes a lack of creativity on the artist's end. But those are the only things that I think you need to watch out for. Now, I want to talk about another shortcut that artists often use, and that is line correction. Or like when you use vector layers to go back and edit outlines with control points. In fact, YouTube animator Toniko made a real funny cartoon short a while back on this subject, and it basically pokes fun at people who shame digital artists for using tools like line correction and drawing with a mouse instead of a pencil or a tablet. Honestly, that video really sums up the point I'm trying to make here. I recommend checking that out. Okay, sorry, I'm in the middle of editing, and I just realized that part of the video was somehow lost in the process. So just to summarize what I was saying, I was going to explain that I believe the tool that you use for drawing, whether it's a tablet, a pencil, or a mouse, that's not nearly as important as the artist using it. What matters most is choosing the method you are most comfortable with. That's what I was trying to say. Anyway, back to the video, sorry for the inconvenience. You will notice that there's a few parts of this preliminary sketch where I use control points to correct the lines. If you happen to have an artist eye, you can tell pretty easily which drawings of mine were made with line correction and which ones weren't. Hell, you could even tell when I'm using a mouse and when I'm using a tablet. For this particular drawing, I used a mouse, and the only parts where I used a line correction were mostly for the preliminary sketch. You'll especially notice this when I'm drawing the fingers and the sunglasses. Or if you happen to follow my channel, you might remember way back in my Lion-O video when I was drawing the blade on the Sword of Omens. I was using a curved line tool in order to get a much straighter, cleaner outline on the blade. Something else you'll notice about a lot of my preliminary sketches is that I use a lot of basic shapes like circles and ovals in order to create the joints or the muscles. Now, I personally don't know of many other artists that do this, but again, just like with line correction or referencing, it's really just another way of doing things, especially if you're an artist who is trying to meet personal deadlines. Like me, I'm always missing deadlines, and I probably shouldn't have just said that, but a lot of artists struggle with deadlines. It sucks, but I just wanted to show you a couple of ways that you can draw faster without resorting to using AI to do all the work. But every once in a while, I have been shamed and criticized for using these shortcuts. I mean, I've even had people tell me not to draw with a mouse. Don't draw with a mouse. Don't use line correction. Don't use references. And what's hilarious is that the same people who shamed me for doing these things are now using AI and pretending to be artists, even people that I know in real life. So, way back when generative AI started to become controversial, I originally assumed that it was just something else that people were blowing out of proportion, kind of like NFTs, because I knew NFTs were doomed to fail. But generative AI is still a very touchy issue, and it's only been getting much worse. The stuff that's going on in art communities is only the peak of the iceberg. Now, this video is mainly about artists, so that's what I'm going to be focusing on the most, but there's actually much greater issues with people using artificial intelligence. For starters, there are a couple of news articles that I'm going to have linked in the video description. The first one is of a woman who was arrested after someone used AI to frame her for a crime she didn't commit. And then the second link is to a story of a school student who took his own life after classmates made pornographic AI videos of him. I mean, it's getting really fucking scary out there. Even though I'm mostly speaking from an artist perspective with this video, it really seems like AI is bringing out the worst in people, and there's hardly any regulations being made against what can and can't be done with it. Like, it's gotten to a point where most of my friends are using AI for literally everything. In fact, just a while back, I got real pissed at one of my friends after he started sending me these really heartfelt messages with ChatGPT. It was the most embarrassing thing ever. I mean, I have friends who are using AI to make illustrations of themselves, which is really annoying because I've offered to make artwork for friends only to be turned down. It's like, imagine you work hard to open your own bookstore and all of your friends would rather buy all their books on Amazon or something. It's that kind of feeling. Now, I actually consider myself sorta lucky because thankfully a lot of the art festivals I attend forbid people from submitting AI imagery, which is good, but unfortunately there are still a lot of businesses that are laying off artists and animators in exchange for AI. There's really nothing I can say that hasn't already been said by countless others. Like, remember when that Corridor Digital video was going viral of that AI anime tech demo? The problem with that video is that instead of just treating it as a tech demo, Corridor Digital hyped the video up as if it was intended to replace artists. Not only that, but they specifically used stolen images from the anime film Vampire Hunter D Bloodlust to replicate the anime look. Granted, they did a terrible job at it, but my point is that they literally had to steal artwork from a copyrighted anime film in order to make the animation. And that really is how AI-generated images, writing, and videos are created. It's scraping data from around the internet, including copyrighted material. In other words, stealing. So it's another form of art theft. Now, I don't think AI is going to completely replace human beings. For starters, I don't see how businesses can make money if consumers have no jobs to make money. I think that's a reality check that people just seem to forget about. Do I think there's a need for alarm? Well, I think it's complicated. Unfortunately, the truth is that AI is not going away, and now people and businesses are going to take advantage of it any way that they can. While it seems like it might be impossible for artists and writers to compete, the truth is that a number of people still have a strong appreciation for things that are made with human hands. An artist who is unskilled is more valuable than a content farm that uploads hundreds of AI images a day that all look the same, because the unskilled artist can still improve, and when you look at their work, you can see their flaws and respect their growth over time and how they get better. When you look at some AI image with some phony Ghibli style, that's not nearly as valuable as a human drawing, even if their work has crude outlines or flat poses, because you can still see the human behind the art. People love when an artist or a writer or whatever, people love when a creator has a personality that people can relate to, a soul behind them, and that's not exclusive to professional artists. I do not believe in being a gifted artist. I don't believe I'm gifted at all, and I'm not saying that to self-deprecate or to fish for compliments or whatever, but what I mean is, I believe that anyone can do what I do, and that's sorta what I would rather be known for. I want to be the guy who showed people that anyone can do what he can do, and they don't need to use AI to do it. I think that's why I try to make so many different kinds of videos on different subjects. I encourage talent, I encourage practice, and I encourage creators to be creative. I'm not trying to take this holier-than-thou stance of, oh, AI is bad, but I think, even just based on the grounds of data scraping and art theft, I do discourage creators from relying on AI. When you let the machine do the creative part of the job, you are no longer the creator. It's just regurgitating ideas, basically. I could also talk about the environmental impacts on water usage, or how generative AI requires large amounts of electricity, thus increasing the need for high energy from data centers, though sadly it seems like a lot of people are too cynical to care about that stuff. Thankfully, though, there still are a number of companies that have taken stances against generative AI. I think it's funny, though, that human art has become an actual term, but basically, I think it's going to be a while until we really need to worry about artists or writers or anyone else being completely phased out by machines. But still, it's both frightening and sad how fast all of these AI tech companies are just competing to get to the top, trying to push AI to its limits without considering legal or moral ramifications. And I do get it. AI can be easy, AI can be addictive and fun, but even if it is good for technology to keep on advancing, I don't think these tech bros care about that. I think it really is just about getting richer, and it's built on a completely misguided concept because technology should only innovate to benefit people, not to replace them. But any of the other shortcuts I've mentioned earlier in this video, whether it's line correction, vector layers, drawing with a mouse, referencing or tracing 3D models as long as you're not stealing, those are all far more ethical than resorting to generative AI. Anyway, I guess I covered everything that I wanted to talk about. I don't know when I'll be doing another one of these. I've got lots of different ideas for videos, and I'd like to get some of them out of the way, then I can start focusing on my artwork again. Yeah, I've been juggling a lot of different stuff lately, but I try to take it in stride. So, thank you all for watching, I hope you like the drawing, I hope you like the video, and I'll see you all next time.